Good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us today. My name is Rachel Janfaza, and I'm an education fellow at the Walton Family Foundation and founder and writer of The Up and Up. Joining me today are John Della Volpe, the director of polling at the Harvard Kennedy School Institute of Politics and the founder and CEO at Social Sphere, and Pearson Woodhull, a high school senior at the Meridian World School in Austin, Texas. Last month, the Walton Family Foundation and Gallup released the Gen Z panel, a research survey exploring attitudes and perspectives on a range of issues related to education. The research found that while Gen Z is optimistic about their future, they do not feel like education is giving them the tools they need to thrive after high school. Today, we'll be discussing how we can better prepare students for stable futures in their desired careers and have their voices heard through civic engagement. In the Gen Z panel data, 41% of Gen Zers report that they are unsure about how to choose the best career path, and 37% report there is a lack of information about potential pathways. Pearson, I'm going to first direct this to you. Does that resonate with you and your classmates as you start to plan for your future beyond high school?
Thank you, Rachel. Absolutely. As my classmates and I prepare to take the next steps after high school, the uncertainty around choosing the best career path and the lack of information regarding potential pathways are very common concerns. We're entering a very different workforce than our parents did, with the rapid changes and innovations regarding work from home, AI, and automation as a whole. The overwhelming number of career paths and the magnitude of the decision, it's no surprise that many of my peers are uncertain about which career path is best and how to pursue it. The education institutions around us fail at giving us enough information to properly address the issue. College is often the only path discussed inside school within any detail. Some schools do offer trade classes such as welding, nursing, or even automotive repair. These classes are often restrictive and have limited number of slots available, and trade options are not discussed outside of these specific class options. Many schools don't even offer these trade options and leave college as the only discussed option after high school, which again leads the uncertainty that many people in my generation have about choosing the best career path or the career path that best suits them. So yes, those statistics definitely resonate with members of my generation, but I'm optimistic that my generation will be able to adapt, seek guidance, and create informed decisions about our futures.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's been a focus on career-connected learning thanks to First Lady Dr. Jill Biden, who's traveled the country highlighting career-connected learning programs, especially at community colleges and trade schools, which you mentioned. And I've written about this and spoken with students who are a part of these types of programs. And what I've found from talking with them is that there's an overwhelming sense of excitement when students are working while taking classes that will set them up for future success, whether that's in the field of construction or engineering or manufacturing. They've shared that when they take a hands-on approach and can earn a wage while they're also in school at the same time, it's easier to see things more practically rather than just in the theoretical. And they're excited by the prospects of future, knowing that those wages will continue down the line. John, so switching gears a bit, another concern for Gen Zers shared in this report is that the financial constraints and obstacles they see as barriers to their education and desired career path. 80% of Gen Zers consider going to college a top priority, and still many are concerned about financial barriers and the potential impacts of student loan debt. Do you have thoughts on the unique barriers to success this generation is facing and how we can work to alleviate some of those concerns?
Sure. Thanks, Rachel. The way I think about this is through the lens of younger people and how they define a good life or their best life. And that is largely defined by having some sense of financial independence. It doesn't mean being, wealthy necessarily, but it means being financially independent, not being dependent upon really kind of their parents or caregivers or some system. It's having, enough resources to have an apartment, to pay for college. Remember, their parents in many cases, Rachel, could work, one job, minimum wage over summer and pay for a year of their college education. That's obviously incredibly difficult and challenging for young people today. So the idea of financial independence is something that I think kind of really connects so many members of this generation. Also, when they think about what their best life means the next couple of years, is to find a way to make an impact. Whether it's building something with your hands in a practical sense, or having a job where they feel like they're having an impact on their own lives or the lives of other members of their community. Ultimately, kind of creating an opportunity to create some roots and to have a family if that's what their wishes are, and a home. So those are really how younger people are defining their best life. And in many ways, they're frustrated, and we can see this in the Gallup and other surveys. They're frustrated at institutions and leaders and administrators who aren't necessarily listening to these those stressors, and providing ways in which they can kind of alleviate some of these concerns. So it's all about, I think, having the independence to make an impact in the areas in which they feel kind of most passionate about.
Totally. And I've also heard, a lot of times when you talk about financial independence, and, they're not trying to, as you said, make millions and millions of dollars. One line that I've heard over and over again is, I'm not trying to thrive, I'm just trying to survive. I don't know if John, if that's something, and Pearson, if that's something you can relate to as well. But, John, you also talk about in your work how Gen Z's lack of a sense of security leads them to civic participation as a mean to improve those very institutions you're talking about that they may, question, but that are meant to serve them. And we see Gen Zers participating in politics at far higher rates than any generation before them. So, John, I'm wondering if you could speak more about that optimism and solutions-based mindset that Gen Z shows. What changes do they want to see from their collaboration and civic engagement?
Yeah, of course. And if I could just take one step back, you mentioned the idea of thriving, surviving rather than thriving. In some recent data that we published from our Harvard Youth Poll, we found that almost 3 out of 4 young people believe that any member of their generation could one day find themselves homeless. That close to 50% of members of the 18 to 29-year-old generation feel they one day themselves could be homeless. So this is, as you said, it's really about survival, and that's something that weighs on them on a regular basis. I think kind of the good news is, and as Pearson mentioned, this is a generation that has outvoted the previous generations when they were younger at the ballot box, especially midterm elections, essentially kind of doubling the historical turnout records in the last couple of midterm elections. And the reason that they do that, and the reason that we can continue, I think, to kind of engage them and to even boost that even higher, is by recognizing the very tangible difference that participation can make. That has always been, the last 20 something years where I've studied younger people, that's always been one of the more predictive elements of whether or not they'll see a turnout. Is there a difference that they believe they can make? And that in order for them to continue to be involved, we need to be reminding them of the difference that they've already made. I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity to do that at the local level, the state level, and the national level that keeps the younger people kind of engaged. When they can see the tangible difference that they can make, that government can make or not make, then I think that keeps them engaged.
Totally. And just one other, thing that I've heard in my experience as well in talking to young people is it doesn't have to even be like a political issue. It can be something as simple as community involvement. And there was this young woman I spoke to outside of Miami, Florida, who said, my local government, I felt they weren't reaching the youngest members of the community. So she went to a city council meeting and said, you should really get on Instagram and you should be promoting your activities, your community events through your social media channels so that we can actually participate. So I think, there's ways big and small that young people are calling upon their elected officials to communicate with them and engage with them, and it can make a big difference.
If I could just add to that, I could just add to that, Rachel, in reminding younger people that they are too eligible to vote in school board races. Sometimes they don't appreciate the fact that if they're not a parent, that they can vote, or that they need to, be an expert in every single aspect of the ballot. But reminding younger people that they can choose to focus on one issue and make an impact, or on one ballot, I think is an important message that I think that they would appreciate hearing.
Right. And that speaks to the broader theme of collaboration too, and across generations. Pearson, every day, roughly 10,000 young Americans turn 18, and the youth share of the electorate is growing. Do you feel like candidates understand Gen Z's needs and that you and your classmates have an opportunity to have your voices heard, sort of to John's point just now? What would you say energizes you and your classmates to get to the polls?
Well, the ability to vote is very exciting for Gen Z, myself included. I'm very eager to cast my first ballot coming up here in a couple months, and I think this is shared by a lot of my peers. Gen Z was a generation that grew up around so many different political movements: the March for Our Lives, Black Lives Matter, the fights for equality and climate change are all things that are very core to us and have been with us the entire time that we were growing up. And so the idea that John said that we're able to finally participate and have our voices heard is really motivating to my generation as a whole. Issues that pertain to our future and have long-term effects that'll really affect the rest of our lives are particularly energizing to my generation. Things like climate change get us out to the polls. The long-term effects of our government are all things that we're really interested in, because when older voters are no longer here, we're the ones that are going to have to see the effects of all these decisions. And so, although we are very motivated to vote, I feel as if a good social media influence and persuasion would be really helpful for my generation, being so tech savvy that any type of social media campaign would be very energizing to my generation as a whole. Although we are motivated to vote and very energized to do so, we struggle to find candidates who really represent us. Being so young and our candidates being so old, it's hard to find people who share our same values and principles and have grown up in the same area and time period as us. We often see our presidential candidates as being the oldest ever elected, and in the coming election, I think we're going to see that too, that no matter who is elected, they'll be the oldest president to ever serve. And so while we are energized, we're hoping to find candidates that represent us and reflect more of our tastes and values and future elections. And hopefully, as more Generation Z are able to vote, we'll be able to fight for candidates that represent us and be able to have our voices heard. Thank you.
Totally. And I think also, while there are older candidates who are able to, or older politicians, elected officials who are able to represent the beliefs and the ideology of younger members of their communities, there also are starting to be more Gen Z candidates who are running for office themselves. In 2022, we saw the first Gen Z member of Congress, Representative Maxwell Frost, elected. And these candidates have adopted techniques that are more in line with their generation. For example, ahead of those midterm elections, you had candidates like Representative Frost going to college campuses in his district. And at the same time, there was a Gen Z candidate running in New Hampshire, Caroline Leavitt, she's a Republican. She was going to college campuses up in New Hampshire. And you see candidates using TikTok to speak to their constituents, even just the lingo they're using. I recently wrote a piece about the clothes that Gen Z elected officials, both in Congress and also at the state level and city council level, are wearing that make them appear more authentic. And authenticity is really something that I think across the board, both younger voters, but also younger elected officials are prioritizing as a value that is deeply important to them in order to be themselves, but also connect with younger members of their community who are just like them. So those are a few things I've noticed as well. John, I'm wondering what your thoughts are on this and how you have seen this space and sort of the younger candidates change their tactics over time to reach younger voters.
Well, I think, as you said, it's really about, authenticity and those values and the appreciation that I think a lot of elected officials need to continue to have and to think about and to internalize is the fact that what motivates younger people, and I think this cuts across most every socioeconomic and demographic cohort within Gen Z and younger millennials, is this concern about basic fundamental rights slipping away. So when Pearson talks about the right to a quality education, right? The basic right to breathe clean air and drink clean water, the right to access to healthcare, specifically women's reproductive health care in many states, the right to feel safe, when you enter a school or a public place. I could go on, but these are the issues I think that kind of motivating young people to go out and to participate in. And not only are those rights that they see themselves fighting for, but also when young people vote, what makes me so optimistic is they're fighting for the rights of those even more vulnerable than themselves, right? So that's something that I think is just really kind of important and impressive. And when I talk to younger voters, they say, you know what, I'm not sure that President Biden or former President Trump can actually ever understand my perspective and what my life is like and the challenges that I have. But I at least need them to empathize, and to work really, really hard at that. And, I've been doing this work, focused on young people now for over a couple of decades. And I'm at least seeing now the last couple of years, only because of youth participation, that some elected officials, some leaders are beginning to take young people seriously because they know that's a difference of them being in office or not in office. There are enough examples of that. But I will kind of push back a little bit that you don't necessarily need to be of the generation, to lead the generation, but you at least need to take the time, spend the time with young people, finding ways to constantly kind of connect and understand their values and their perspective. And I think one of the great pieces of news, and the reason that I read your Substack so religiously, Rachel, is there are so many examples, hundreds and not thousands of examples of Gen Z, not just protesting and sharing their views on social media, but they're doing those things as well as putting themselves kind of upfront in the arena and running for office. And I think that that's something that's very, very unique about this generation. It shows the urgency and fight that they have.
Totally. And I appreciate that, John. Thank you. And your Substack too, with all of the quantitative data, is extraordinarily helpful in thinking about sort of contextualizing some of the more anecdotal evidence we're seeing. We have a bit more time, so I just want to ask one other question, which pertains to entrepreneurship and leadership, which was another piece of the data that we found. When asked about the future that they want, Gen Zers were most likely to say they hope to work at a paid job, and 1/3 say they would like to start their own business. I'm curious if that entrepreneurial drive and autonomy is something that you are both seeing. Maybe we can start with you, Pearson, if that's something that you're seeing amongst your classmates or even you feel yourself.
I definitely think that this is something that my generation shares as a whole. This idea that we want to create something with our own hands and have tangible results. And that's why entrepreneurship or entrepreneurial enterprises really attract us. But at the same time, it all reflects on, are we going to be able to create a living wage at whatever job we do or whatever career pathway we have? And so I think a lot of these entrepreneurial spirits are fantastic and they resonate with a lot of the values my generation has. But it all needs to be able to provide for us and give us that financial independence. So there's definitely a division between the people who are very entrepreneurial and the ones who just want to find a working living wage.
Yeah, I think this kind of speaks to that, younger people wanting to run for office too. They're like saying, they're seeing, if other people aren't going to do it, I'm going to do it myself. John, do you see this in the conversations you're having with young Americans in terms of wanting to start their own thing instead of abiding to what's been done before them?
Every day, it's one of the biggest. It's actually, Rachel, one of the biggest changes in the tone of the conversation, the content of the conversation over the last year or so. I just came off the road from doing about a dozen focus groups, and the idea of, I think it's a different kind of entrepreneurship. From what I'm hearing, it's like self-entrepreneurship, right? It's not necessarily building the next great tech company. It's about kind of creating an opportunity for you to live your best life, right? I hear a lot about actually kind of passive income, which means that it's about being flexible, right? And potentially kind of raising a family or being part of a community, and being able to kind of work from home if that's what your choice is, right? But it's about having that flexibility and not relying on the institutions that have, in the eyes of many young people, have continued to let them and their generation and their loved ones down. So it's, again, I think it's really kind of embedded kind of in these values in terms of what their life goal is. It's just to have a happy life, be surrounded by people who share their values, who care about them, and to try to make their kind of their life, their community, and the world just a little bit better. Don't forget that common through line, again, through this research and other research, is the stress and the anxiety that they're feeling on a regular basis. So if they can create some flexibility through entrepreneurship that allows them to live a more holistic life, I think that's something that's very, very important to them, and something that I think they're constantly asking, members of the administrators and teachers and other people who are in charge of curriculum to consider, right? The idea of coming out of that high school or college experience, being prepared for life, having strong social skills, having strong kind of emotional social content, as well as the basics on how to live that next chapter as effectively as possible.
Yeah. Thank you for that. It's been so great to hear both of your perspectives, and I'm so grateful both to John and Pearson for you joining me today. And thank you to all who tuned in for our conversation. If you're interested in learning more about the Gen Z panel conducted by Walton and Gallup, you can read the full report on the Walton Family Foundation website.